Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody, wherever we are on the planet. And we would like to welcome you to the Post-2020 Indicators webinar, where we are looking at the proposed headline indicators for access and benefit sharing, namely Goal C and Target 13 of the draft Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And before we start, just a bit of technical instructions. And it is for us good to use the wired internet or be very close to your Wi-Fi source so that connectivity does not become an issue. To save bandwidth, please close the programs you are not using. And for better sound, use a headset or connect to session audio by dialing in with your telephone. And for that, you can see your registration email. And for intermittent internet connections, it may be best to dial in using one of the local numbers in the registration email. Use the question box to advise organizers of any technical issues and for specific questions to facilitators or presenters. There is, of course, a chat box, but when it comes to the substantive issues and issues raised by the moderators or facilitators or presenters, please put those in the question box. In terms of the objectives that we have set for ourselves for today, we would like to provide examples of national data collection systems as they relate to ABS, based on your experiences out there as parties. And then we would like to share information on ABS indicators to help inform the forthcoming negotiations in Geneva, namely the working group on the 2020 Global Biodiversity Forum or framework, which is the third Substar 24 COP15. And then we would like to finally reflect on potential challenges, approaches, and solutions for the development of headline indicators for ABS, which are expected to cover monetary benefits, non-monetary benefits, and operational and effective national ABS measures. So we hope that by the end of this seminar, we would have reached our objectives as set out for today. I would like to give us a very brief outlook on the agenda that we have in front of us. It's fairly short, and there would be slight changes that we have made. And if you look, we will start off with a very small poll, and I'll be asking my colleague to shortly to do so, to introduce that poll. And then we will look at the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the proposed indicators for ABS. And there, my colleague, Gillian Campbell, will be taking us through and giving us an overview of what that looks like. And we will then have data collection and reporting on national ABS systems in the context of the post-2020 proposed headline indicators. And for that, we have a panel set up for you, comprising of Mr. Thomas Greiber from the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation in Germany, Mr. Joseph Masinde from the National Environment Management Authority in Kenya, then Mr. Esteban Neira from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, Colombia. Then we've got Dr. Esker Kata from the India Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and Dr. Mathur from the National Biodiversity Authority of India. We now have a fourth panelist, who is Mr. Guillaume Faure, Ministry of Ecological Transition and General Directorate of Planning, Housing and Nature from France. We will then, after they have presented, we will have a moderated discussion where we will zoom into some of the aspects that they would have shared with us. And at that point, you are free to then ask questions. At this stage, may I ask my colleague Alex to do for us the welcome poll. Over to you, Alex.
You should see a poll popping up. If you could, we'll give you a few seconds to answer the poll, and then we'll see our results just to see who's in the room, first of all. I see there's still many people in the process of voting, so I'll give it 5 more seconds. Okay. So we can see that most people here are from government or intergovernmental organizations with 60%, but also some from academia, collections, museums, the private sector, civil society. There's quite a mix. Now the second poll is about indicators. And so we'll give you a few seconds to reply to this one to know how often you use indicators in your work. All right, so I'll close this poll. Seems like most people have answered. And we can see that there is also a range here, but most people are either often, every few months, or very often, daily or weekly, some occasionally, some rarely, and some never. All right, back to you, Tauko.
Thank you, Alex. If we look at those numbers of the poll, nothing was above 50. That's a telltale. And there are those who do not use indicators. That's also a telltale. But the idea is then to look at, since ABS is a fairly, one can say, young concept, what indicators do we have, and why should we have indicators? And for that, let me then hand over the floor to my colleague Gillian Campbell to take us through the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and proposed indicators for ABS, and then we take it from there. Over to you, Gillian.
Okay, I don't know if you can see my screen or not. I can't see it, so it says it that you can see it, so I'm going to assume that you can. So I'm not going to go into great detail on the monitoring framework, but really what I think that we need to be discussing is the importance of having ABS indicators. And I'm going to say that in developing the monitoring framework, it was a real challenge to find ABS indicators from the technical side. And so trying to find indicators that could be suggested or that that could be provided to the parties for their consideration was really a challenge, and this was something that the Secretariat and also WCMC, who helped with the analysis, really struggled with. And it is an issue that needs consideration, because if we can't develop indicators for ABS, or if there are no indicators for ABS, then obviously it is going to be a challenge in monitoring that aspect of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And it's also going to be a challenge for parties who wish to use this sort of information in their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and for parties who are trying to do analysis that can help provide them with information on the national situation in terms of ABS. So I just wanted to quickly say what the GBF logic is versus the IACI. So I'm sure that most of the people on this call are aware, but the GBF logic is a shift from the IACI in that there are goals which are aiming to provide a roadmap to 2050 of where the planet wants to be. And so these are primarily outcome level type of goals, things like ecosystem extent, or ABS is one of them. And they're aspirational to take the biodiversity community into the future, whereas the targets are actions and action related. And so the indicators that are currently in the monitoring framework and being proposed for these match the logic of the GBF. And I think that this is something that is a change from the IACI as well, because the IACI was focused on targets and didn't have these sort of goal framework to provide this vision into the future. Additionally, another change is that in the case of the IACI, the monitoring framework was not part of the actual IACI framework. And so the indicators were then developed at a later time by a group of partners at the global level. And this time around, there seems to be an increased focus on monitoring and on ensuring that the monitoring framework itself is a part of the global biodiversity framework and gets adopted at COP. And so this is a shift in the logic. And so there is a current proposal for indicators that may be useful for people to look at. And there will be a new one that's released within the next 2 weeks for the upcoming January SEPSTA meeting, and as well as the open-ended working group and SBI meetings, which will happen in January. In this monitoring framework, there's 3 different levels of indicators, which was already mentioned by Tauco. We have the headline indicators. The headline indicators are more high-level indicators that are attempting to capture the scope and the goals of the targets. Obviously, this is something that will be negotiated by the parties. However, it does seem that at the current time, the focus of these headline indicators, the way that they're being envisioned, would be for both national level tracking and global level tracking, and that there would be the use of these indicators in national reporting. So this would be a shift, again, from having only global data providers involved, but to really making sure that governments and other national stakeholders are involved in monitoring. Then there's component indicators, which are more detailed. Often they provide sort of a disaggregation of the headline indicator or more information, and are still nationally relevant. And then the complementary indicators, which is a full set of sort of a menu of indicators that could be useful for analysis at different levels of different parts of the framework. So as mentioned, it's expected that the monitoring framework will continue to be negotiated by parties, and that parties would then rely on technical experts, such as the people attending this webinar as well, to try to provide guidance on how some of these indicators could be operationalized. And I think this is particularly the case in the ABS context, where, as I mentioned, there are a lack of operational indicators that can measure at either the goal or the target level. So, as I said, the monitoring framework will be further discussed in January, and a document will be released for the SAPSTA meeting, or attached to the SAPSTA meeting in January very soon. So these are the current indicators for ABS that are in the framework. So there's 3 that are directly related to ABS. One on monetary benefits from the utilization of genetic resource as a result of an ABS agreement. This is, again, not an existing indicator. There's no existing data set for this. However, this is something that matches with the numerical advice that was provided with relation to Goal C. Similarly, on non-monetary benefits, there is not an indicator on non-monetary benefits. And so the indicator that is proposed is something that could potentially be operationalized to capture certain elements of non-monetary benefits. And so this is the indicator that's proposed at C02. And then at the target level, as I mentioned, the targets are more measuring actions than as opposed to measuring the outcomes. And so this is, again, sort of a place taker indicator, which is related to operational, legislative, administrative, or policy frameworks. Again, this is not an existing indicator. That's what the asterisks mean in the framework. This is something, however, that could likely be developed as a through a sort of questionnaire to parties that ask if they have these different elements of a policy framework in place. And this could be done, obviously, in the context of the Nagoya Protocol, but it could go beyond that in order to make sure that it is relevant for all parties. So, as I mentioned, just a few reflections for the discussion today, which is that on ABS, there really are not operational indicators at the current time. And even the indicators that do exist still need a lot of development in order to be relevant at these different levels, in order to provide information that's relevant for IPLCs, for national governments, and also for global review. It is something that certainly needs further consideration so that consistent indicators can be developed and proposed that actually provide useful information for this sort of decision making. And this is outside of the context, I think, of the GBF as well. You know, there is a lack of information on ABS for decision making, sort of across the board, and it is going to be difficult to develop some of these measures. However, I think that it's certainly important in the context of having information that can inform ABS decision making. And so, I mean, I think I've already sort of said this, but in addition to tracking global progress, there certainly needs to be this national relevance. There, in the context of the previous SAPSTA meeting, was a lot of discussion on the need for capacity building around the monitoring topic. And I do think that whatever happens moving forward, that the global biodiversity framework will provide an opportunity for better refining how capacity building related to data information is done, by providing some additional guidance on what to measure and what is going to be important for decision making. So that is it from my side, and thank you again for inviting me to this discussion.
Thank you, Gillian. And for those who have just joined us, we are busy with our workshop on the post-2020 indicators for ARCs and benefit sharing. And we had an overview about the framework and the proposed indicators for ABS. And so we will now proceed to the second part of our seminar webinar today, and I would call to the floor then Mr. Thomas Schreiber from the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. He will be followed by Mr. Joseph Masinde from Kenya, Mr. Esteban Naira from Colombia, Dr. Kerkata and Dr. Matur from India, and Mr. Guillaume Faure from France. May the speakers please take note that time is always there, but it is not on our side, unfortunately. And so let's take note of that as we go through our presentation so that we have enough time for discussions with those that are attending the webinar. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Tauko. I hope you can hear me. And I also hope you can see my presentation now. Thank you very much for the invitation and the possibility to speak today. I will quickly report a little bit about how we collect information in Germany. Just to explain upfront, Germany is, of course, a Nagoya Protocol party since 2016. We have uploaded all the information we have on ABS in the ABS clearinghouse, which is the basic requirement, I guess, for making ABS happening and a success in the world. But I should also mention that Germany has no access and benefit sharing provisions. We are focusing only, so to say, on checking compliance as foreseen in Articles 15 and following under the Nagoya Protocol. So this is the main focus I will be having here in my presentation. So starting with the goal C and the aspect of monetary benefit sharing. As I explained, Germany does not require prior informed consent or mutually agreed terms in its legislation, and therefore we are also not receiving any monetary benefits from the utilization of German genetic resources, so we don't have actually any information on that. For the same reason, we are also not collecting information on non-monetary benefit sharing, which I will address on the next slide. However, what we have in terms of monetary benefit or related to monetary benefit sharing is in our compliance system, we have an obligation to file due diligence declarations, so declarations of users at the final stage of product development. So before a product is put on the market or before research results are being sold within the EU or outside. So users have to file such due diligence declarations. These declarations are then turned into checkpoint communiques on the ABS clearinghouse, so they are published. The provider state is also informed about such utilization. The declarations do not include figures on the monetary side, so it's not specified how much benefit sharing is taking place. The reason is the primary focus of these declarations is to check whether pick and mud were obtained, kept and transferred to third parties. Now the question is whether we could, if we wanted to, also provide concrete figures. This would be a practical challenge in terms of implementation because in the end of the day, we wouldn't have the information. It would be the provider state who would need to report whether the money has flown. And we would also not be, from a legal point of view, in a position to implement then the benefit sharing because it's based on contracts and so this is beyond our control. Going to the non-monetary benefit sharing, as I mentioned, we are also not collecting information regarding non-monetary benefits received and also not regarding non-monetary benefits shared by German users, but we have also a due diligence declaration obligation at the stage of research funding. So users are reporting to us when they are using genetic resources in publicly or privately funded projects. In addition to that, we are in Germany about to start a research project where we try to examine trends in non-monetary benefit sharing. So the goal is to develop a method to quantify non-monetary benefit sharing, to measure information which is to be found in public ABS agreements, to also see what we can find in databases, and to translate the non-monetary benefit sharing also into a value for societal impact, and so on and so forth. So this project will be implemented by a German collection, the DSMZ, which is currently looking for colleagues to join the team and work on this project. Moving on to target 13 and the possibility or measures taken to evaluate and assess the ABS measures. In Germany, at the national level, we are reporting on a yearly basis to our parliament on how we implement the Nagoya Protocol, how we support our scientific community in terms of compliance with the Nagoya Protocol, and also the staff requirements that we see. Only this year, we've made our first evaluation of the German Implementing Act. And at the EU level, the EU member states are reporting to the Commission on the application of the EU regulation, which provides the framework for this EU compliance system. These reports take place every 5 years. The Commission then reports to the EU Parliament and the Council and tries to assess the effectiveness of the EU regulation. And then in 2028, for the first time, there will be a review of the functioning and effectiveness of the EU regulation. What kinds of data are we collecting in Germany, which could be relevant for indicators? So far, we are, as I said, focusing on our compliance checks. We are developing a list of potential users. We've already tested Nagoya Protocol awareness. We are, of course, collecting numbers of the compliance checks that we've undertaken, and even more important, the outcomes of the compliance checks. And here you see a small graph which showcases the interim results of our first cycle of compliance checks. You see that we are monitoring the reasons or the results of our compliance checks from genetic resources which were used from a party without pick and mud obligations, from genetic resources which were accessed before the 12th of October 2014, etc. Different reasons, but we are also, as you see in the list, of course, collecting information on situations where users obtained pick and mud as was required, as well as non-compliance situations. What could, from my personal point of view, be collected maybe at the global level? Of course, numbers or information that is found on the ABS clearinghouse could be important in terms of monitoring the effectiveness of the ABS system, from IRCCs to checkpoint communiques to ABS procedures that have been published on the ABS clearinghouse. But I think what is important to understand is that not only the increase in total numbers counts, but even more so the increase in numbers of parties that are submitting such data to the ABS clearinghouse. Completeness and up-to-dateness of ABS country profiles could be important information. Also, the number of countries that are have enacted compliance measures as envisaged under Article 15 to 17 Nagoya Protocol. So not monitoring the use of their genetic resources outside of the country, but the other way around, monitoring the use of foreign genetic resource by national users, as we are doing it in the EU. Duration of pick and mud procedures could be also interesting, as well as the implementation of Article 8 of the Nagoya Protocol. Now, this brings me to my last slide. What would be the key messages from my side? I think monetary benefit sharing can be best monitored by the provider countries. Non-monetary benefit sharing and its monitoring would benefit greatly from standardized procedures, and if possible, automation, because in the end there is a lot of non-monetary benefit sharing taking place, but it is hard to track. Data on measures, on ABS measures, can only provide hints in terms of effectiveness and implementation. It's not always straightforward. As I mentioned, total numbers have to be differentiated or put in context. Then we should also keep in mind that the reporting burden needs to be manageable. ABS staff is scarce on all sites. In provider countries, we see that. In user countries such as Germany, but also on the side of our users. And such reporting should not further hamper ABS processes, because we are all busy in monitoring but not implementing anymore. And last but not least, I personally think that standardized procedures at the global level for ABS procedures, for example, would not only increase the efficiency and facilitate ABS implementation, but it would also support us in ABS monitoring and reporting, as we are discussing here. So I thank you all for your attention, and I hope I stayed within the 10 minutes more or less. Thank you, Tauko. Back to you again.
Thank you, Thomas. Very interesting insights, but I would not reflect on that yet, as we will have time for that. May I now give the floor to Mr. Joseph Masinde for him to give us his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Hello. Good morning.
Yes, we can hear you well, Mr. Masinde. Thanks.
We can hear you very well.
Okay. You have my presentation?
We're seeing your screen.
You see my screen.
Can you please open your presentation? Yes.
Okay.
There we go. All right. Then presentation mode. Can you put it in presentation mode, please?
I'm putting it on.
At the bottom right corner of your screen, you should find the presentation button.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Joseph Masinde. I'm a Senior Environmental Education Information Officer at NEMA, Kenya. That is the National Environment Management Authority, which is the focal point for the CBD clearinghouse and also the ABS clearinghouse. And I'm the desk officer in charge of those focal points. Basically, my introduction is on the regulations we have been able to come up with on ABS. These are regulations which were formulated way back in 2006, even before when Nagoya was adopted. And we have been implementing those regulations ever since, and they are on access and benefit sharings. And basically, right now, what we are doing, we are trying to review those regulations to keep in line with the new constitutions we came up, and also the Nagoya Protocol, which we ratified. So with regard to the subject of prior informed consent and mutual between providers and users, any person intending to access genetic resources naturally in Kenya need an access permit for genetic resources, and also a certificate from the National Commission of Science, Technology and Innovation. So the process of getting these permits, it is multi-agents, and it involves various organizations. And right now, to improve on our efficiency, we are coming up with the first online permitting system. Right now, there was a consortium who came up and reviewed our domestic legislation and visited all the relevant institutions to see how they process their licenses, so that we can come up with a harmonized system of processing access and benefit sharing permits. As I said earlier, we approved the regulation in 2006, and our access permits are subject to prior informed consent and mutual agreed terms. And we are now in the process of developing an online system. Of course, the monetary benefits, so they consist of any of these access fees. Normally, people, when they apply for these permits, the licenses, they have to pay some money, which is collected and documented. And we also have other areas where we look at as benefits. The fees paid on trust funds for supporting conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, salaries, preference terms, and mutual agreed terms, research funding, and joint ventures, and also the joint ownership of relevant intellectual property rights. In the area of non-monetary benefits, of course, sharing of research, information, and then administrations of ex situ facilities of genetic resources, human and institutional capacity building, of course, access to the scientific information for research, institution and professional relationship arising from access and benefit sharing agreements, and then subsequent cooperation activities. This is basically the structure of how the benefit sharing flowchart looks like. We can have the upfront payments, access fees, and royalties. In the area of non-monetary, we can sharing of research findings, institutional capacity building, and then the joint ownership of the intellectual property rights. The ABS Technical Committee, we have a committee. It is under the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and it comprises of various institutions, NEMA, where I work. We have the National Commission of Science, Technology. We have the Kenya Industrial Property Institute. We have the Kenya Wildlife Service, the Kenya Forest Service, the Kenya Plant Health Inspector Service, the Kenya Agricultural Research Institute, and the National Museums of Kenya. Basically, this committee is also in charge of generating data and reporting, and also the preparation of position papers for the COP meetings. And of course, the type of information, which of course is relevant to access and benefit sharing. We have been able to document the PIC, the maths, validity of access permits. We have a file on the access permit we have been able to issue out, the collection of the genetic resources deposited in the relevant lead institutions in Kenya, in the National Museums of Kenya, for example, or the Kenya Wildlife Service. We also have at NEMA records of tangible components of the genetic resources deposited within the lead agencies. Of course, according to the law, the regulation we have developed, the permit holder is required to submit quarterly reports to NEMA on the status of the research once he has collected our resources, and then information on the discoveries made involving the genetic resources and the tangible components. Report on the status, report on the environmental impact on ongoing collection of the genetic resources and the tangible components. Of course, once the permit we have issued, it will be normally uploaded in the clearinghouse, the ABS clearinghouse, where it becomes the international recognized certificate for compliance. And of course, the details of that certificate, so of course, you all know they are highlighted there. You are aware of them. I don't need to go through them. And the relevant information, of course, is the prior informed consent, the sources of the genetic resources, the establishment of the MAT, and then the utilizations, if any. But most of these permits we issued out are just for research. They don't tell us about the utilization aspect of it. Of course, monitoring benefits, of course, the goal C, the challenges. In most cases, the information is confidential. You cannot really know the money from the royalties bill. Normally, this information is a secret housed in most of the agencies. So making compilation of such information is very difficult. So when it comes to the issues of money and benefits, and people don't want to disclose, and that's why we normally have many court cases, the communities taking the county government or agencies to court, saying that the researchers came and collected specimens and they went away, they are generating income and we are not benefiting. And these are subject to court cases. And this is because there's no proper system of collection of information and also of non-monetary benefits also. For a case study, we have the Kenya Wildlife Service and the Denmark-based Novozymes to access and exploit commercial purposes genetic resource, enzyme, and microorganisms within the national park. And these presently, there is a case going in court where the communities have taken KWS to court because they are not appropriately compensated. National measures, target 13, there are various laws and regulations governing access and benefit sharing in the country. And then violation of these regulations constitute an offense under the Act and violation of Kenyan Constitution 2010. And we are able to prosecution. Article 42, 69, and 70 of the Constitution relates to environmental rights and natural resources. Article 69 mandates the state to ensure sustainable exploitation, utilization, management, and conservation of environment and our natural resources. And then ensure equitable sharing of accrued benefits, protect the genetic resources, biological diversity, utilization for the benefit of Kenya people. We have a national focal point, that is the ministry. The principal secretary is the focal point. The competent authorities is NEMA. We are also the publishing authority. And we have suggested that also Kenya Wildlife Service, National Museums of Kenya should also be the competent authority. Of course, I said you need a permit. And this is a flow access procedure on how to acquire that permit. And also the processing of acquired genetic resources for export. We also need to go through a process where you apply for a period transfer agreement. Yes. Then seek other permits before you can be able to export. To conclude, of course, we need to note that we have prepared the first interim report available on the ABS clearinghouse. Of course, we have data on access, on research permits, the PIC and MATs. Of course, this information is gotten from those agencies. And then the various fees, information can be gotten from the various institutions. NEMA, we have the access permit fees. We have been able to document. Utilization of the fees and benefits are not well documented. Yes. Challenges, utilization fee are not well documented. Awareness, the concept of ABS is still low in Kenya. We need capacity building. We need uniform indicators across the institutions, harmonizing the online data collection, and in most cases, there are projects which just project-driven processes. Once they come to an end, the whole process stops. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Masinde. And our next presenter is Mr. Esteban Naira. We had a very good insight from Mr. Masinde. And let's now listen to Mr. Naira. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Tolko. I'm going to share my presentation. Okay, there we go. So, good time of the day to everyone. Thank you to the Secretariat for preparing this webinar and for inviting us to be part of it. My name is Esteban Neira. I am speaking on behalf of the Genetic Resources Group of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, which is the unique competent national authority in Colombia for ABS matters. Oh, sorry, I have some delay on my presentation. Yeah. So the access and benefit sharing regulation in Colombia is framed under the Andean Decision 391 of 1996, which is the common regime on access to genetic resources for the Andean community countries, currently Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. At the national level, ABS is regulated through Decree 730 of 1997, which determined that the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development as the competent national authority to comply with the provisions of the Andean Decision 391 of 1996 in Colombia, the Resolution 1348 of 2014, which settled the activities that constitute access to genetic resources and its derivatives in Colombia, Resolution 1352 of 2017, which established the obligations regarding the regime on industrial property and ABS, and Decrees 1375 and 1376 of 2013, which determined that the activities done with molecular ecology, molecular systematics, evolution, and biogeography purposes do not constitute access to genetic resources. As settled in the Andean Decision 391 of 1996, the authorization for access to genetic resources and its derivatives in Colombia is granted through a contract. In this document, the conditions and the obligations for access to genetic resources and derivatives of species of Colombian origin are settled, as well as the obligations regarding the benefit sharing derived from these access activities. As it is a contract, all its clauses are negotiated and signed between both the ministry as the provider of the resource and the user, and therefore this single document acts as the previous informed consent in which mutually agreed terms are established. In this document, in this contract, both non-monetary benefits and monetary benefits are agreed. In case of the non-monetary benefit, they are proposed and concerted between both the ministry and the user based on the annex of the Nagoya Protocol and the Bonn Guidelines, and they could be, for example, facilitated access to research results, technology transfer, technical training for resource providers, and technical training for the community of influence. In case of the monetary benefits, they are calculated using different formulas based on the information that the user must provide in some documents when they request access for commercial purposes, and they could be three types of monetary benefits: an initial payment, a payment associated with milestones, and a payment associated with profits. The criteria that are considered for determining the monetary benefits are the productive sector, if the species is endemic or not, the threat level of the species, and the type of applicant. All contracts for access to genetic resources have clauses both for benefit sharing and to follow up the obligations agreed in the contract. In case of the clause for benefit sharing, there is determined the amount and the type of monetary or non-monetary benefit to be shared, as well as the way and the periodicity to comply with those obligations. In case of the follow-up clause, it is settled an obligation to present activity reports in a periodicity that depends on the time of execution of the contract. It is mainly annually, and it is also established the kind of information, what information the user must send with its activity reports, that consist basically in the evidence of the activities done to comply with the obligations agreed in the contract clauses and the objectives of the access activities. Once the activity reports are received, this ministry evaluates them and issues a follow-up report that could be considered closed when all the evidence allows to identify the degree of compliance of the contract clauses, and open when the user must send more information to determine the degree of compliance of the obligation settled in the contract clauses. These activity reports and the follow-up reports that the ministry issues are therefore the main source of information and data collection, which allow to determine the fulfillment of the obligations agreed in the contract, including those for benefit sharing. All the monetary benefits derived from contracts for access to genetic resources are collected through a national environmental fund, which is directly associated with this ministry. This fund has a sub-account exclusively for the money derived from contracts for access to genetic resources and its derivatives. Therefore, the information on the amount of money collected is always available for the fund's manager, and this money is destined to projects for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. The evidence of the compliance of the monetary benefits obligations settled in the contracts are the proof of deposits that the user must send attached to its activity reports in the follow-up step. So with this general background of the ABS system in Colombia, I will now provide you some examples of contracts that have been subscribed and the information on benefit sharing that is available for them. In this first example, this contract was signed with a company for the study of microbial communities associated with the cultivation and post-harvest of cocoa, as it is a contract only for bioprospecting purposes. Only non-monetary benefits were agreed, which in this case were the publication of 3 research articles, the elaboration of 2 guides of cocoa fermentation, the realization of 1 course of cocoa fermentation, participation in congresses to share results, and trainings to the team of the Dreams Route to strengthen its sustainable tourism initiative. Other example, if this contract subscribed with another company, this contract is for commercial purposes and is for the use of an extract obtained for Sapindus saponaria as an active ingredient for a commercial product for the phytosanitary management of an agricultural crop. As it is a commercial contract, the monetary benefits agreed were an approximately initial payment of $1,000 and 1.5% of the annual net profits. And as non-monetary benefits, you can see that there were agreed mainly technical trainings for the provider of the biological resource, for the community where the biological resource is obtained, visits to the company by the provider, and also the participation in events for the socialization of the research results. Finally, this contract was signed with a research institute of Colombia for the development of a pigment from the diversity of microorganisms in the Amazon region to build a pilot ABS project for commercial purposes. As non-monetary benefit, it was agreed to carry out a workshop aimed at leaders of indigenous communities and environmental authorities on sustainable use of biodiversity and green ventures with natural ingredients of species of the region. And other activities done in the project are the development of a protocol for the protection of intellectual property and technology transfer into the Amazon value chain. This is a brief summary of the information regarding the ABS system in Colombia and the information available for some contracts that have been subscribed. So I look forward for your comments and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Naira. And we are now ready to proceed. And our next presenters are Dr. Kerkata and Dr. Mathur. Let's be looking at the time, because this was the time that we were supposed to start our discussions. And we still have 2 presentations to go. Bear with us, and let's see how far we get. Over to you, Dr. Kerkata and Dr. Mathur.
Come in, Dr. Kerkata, please. Dr. Kerkata.
You have the floor.
We are in different parts of the country, but Dr. Kerkata, kindly come in, please. Can you hear me, sir? Hello? Hello?
In the interest of time, can you please perhaps just proceed and go through the presentation?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Can you see my slide? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Okay. Okay.
We are on one that says India and the Convention on Biodiversity.
Okay. So this is, as I said, was supposed to be a joint presentation by Dr. Kerkata, who is the CBD focal point based in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And I work as the chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority, which is the environmental regulator. Just to, as has been shown, our journey with CBD has been nearly 30 years old. And we did enact our own act in 2002. Then we had in 2014 framed our ABS guidelines. We signed the first IRCC in 2015. And in 2021, I am very pleased to say that we now have the highest IRCC issued, as I will be showing another slide from now. Next one, please. See, this is the institutional mechanism. We have a 3-tier mechanism. At the top is the ministry and the National Biodiversity Authority. But we also have, India is a big country. We have 28 state provincial boards and the union territory councils. But the beauty part of India's governance is the participatory nature. What you see at the lowest level are 200,000 plus local bodies, which are at the base of India's access and benefit sharing mechanism. These local bodies are at the forefront of regulating the access and benefit sharing process. We have fairly well established and codified the process so that there is no confusion. We get different kinds of applicants, somebody who wants to access the resources, somebody wants to use it for commercial purposes, somebody wants to conduct non-commercial research, and somebody wants for the purpose of sending their paper, they are deposited, the microorganisms are deposited in the non-Indian repository. So this is a very well-defined system which has been serving our cause and our process very effectively. But the beauty part is the online process. See, this is a digital era, and what India has done, India has put together an online filing of access information. We have the big National Informatics Center, which has developed the tool for national data collection system, and every single application which India receives, ministry receives, is filed through this portal. As you can see in the right, 2 years back, our Honorable Minister released this portal, and we are working regularly to upgrade it further. This is what I was saying. Of the nearly 3,000 IRCCs which have been issued till September 2021, 69% of them, they come from India. So we are going a big way in filing of these IRCC and pushing the Nagoya Protocol and the ABS process. Now, I mentioned that India has enacted its own legislation, which was the National Biodiversity Act in 2002. But in 2014, we created a separate guidelines, which are legally vetted, legally endorsed. And these guidelines are called as Guidelines on Access to Biological Resources and Associated Knowledge and Benefit Sharing Regulations. So in the last 6 years or so, these guidelines have been at the forefront in working out a process of putting together in detail the access and benefit sharing process. As was said was by our colleagues from Colombia, we are also looking at the monetary benefit options, and there are, as you can see, 9 different options are given to the proponent. You can make an upfront payment, you can make an online payment, you have a one-time payment, you can also stagger it through milestone payments and so on. So these are a range of benefits processes which the proponent can pick up, and our access and benefit sharing committee then works with the proponent to work out which one of that will be useful. But today I would say that the focus, while it remains on the monetary benefits, we are gradually moving on to push and promote the non-monetary benefit options. As the institutional capacity develops, as the transfer of technology and sharing of research results happens with Indian institutions, as we are willing to share scientific information, we want that this process of access and benefit sharing should have a strong non-monetary component. It could be providing scholarships and financial aid to Indian institutions, setting up of a venture capital fund, and payments of monetary and non-monetary benefits to the benefit claimers as may be worked out. So I have no hesitation in saying that the focus till recently was on monetary benefits, but we are now working with many players to see that how we can push the non-monetary benefits. Now, for this purpose of reporting, while we are all looking at reporting, we also understand the issue of tracking. And this tracking is for the violation of the intellectual property rights. People are trying to access resources on India's biological resources without an associated knowledge, without referring to from where these resources have been sourced. So we have now developed a mechanism, and a well laid out detection strategy is in place, backed by law. And we look at, I have a team of 20 scientists and legal professionals working 24/7 to look at patents, to look at examinations, to look at measures, and we get alerts wherever in any part of the world if an Indian resource is being accessed and either a due permission has not been taken or a benefit sharing has not occurred. So following these, as you can see now on your right, these are our Indian objections in the last few years, 74 of them which have been upheld by the patent offices globally for complying with the provisions, whether it is the EPO or the USPTO or whoever it is. We are looking into it that the process of benefit sharing is logical, it is conducive, and it provides benefit to people. Now, coming back to the subject matter of today's discussion, where we are looking at the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I don't get into the details of what is Goal C and what are the proposed headline indicators. Our colleagues know that. But what India is now trying to suggest at various fora, we are holding bilaterals with countries in Europe, countries in South Asia, countries in Eastern Europe. We are now looking at what could be the possible suggestions of indicators. Can it be the ABS agreement permits issued at the national level? Can it be the users providing non-monetary benefit over there? Number of IRCC's compliance published. So all these are, we are not saying that all of them should get into the post-2020 framework, but we are now trying to evolve a consensus with like-minded people, with like-minded countries. And I would request all our colleagues over here, these presentations would be available at the CBD. So to see that where can we start, where can we see convergence? And we need to say that these are some of these headline indicators. As I said, these are a menu of options, depending on a country's requirement, they can work it out over there. Similarly, we are looking at the legislative, the administrative, the policy framework. We heard what Germany has done. We heard what Colombia has done. We are looking at what East Africa is doing. So we are now looking at a range of measures, the number of countries which have put MAC and PIT in place, the number of countries with measures to protect traditional knowledge. See, this is something I want to highlight, that traditional knowledge is very, very important as far as access and benefit sharing is concerned. So we want to see that which countries have taken measures to protect the traditional knowledge, and whether these have been identified at the national level, and what kind of protocols are now available at the clearinghouse level. Now, this point also was made by colleague. I am only reiterating it. Well, there are many challenges, but I want to focus on 4 challenges. Even after 10 years of Nagoya Protocol, I would recall what the Executive Secretary of the CBD said at the opening of the celebrations last year in October 2020, that Nagoya Protocol is still a baby. Access and benefit sharing needs a hand holding, and that is why we need to raise our awareness in as many ways as possible. And I will compliment the CBD for hosting and organizing this workshop on ABS to raise awareness over there. Traceability is a very important issue, because we need to know where the biological resource is originating, how it is changing hands, who is taking measures on it, who is benefiting to it, and we want to establish the traceability, which I must also say is not easy. We will look at global partnership with like-minded colleagues, that how do we ensure a traceability process over there. I would be mentioning a few points in a while from now. Incentivizing ABS. We want to push it very hard, because every time I talk to the industry, I talk to the corporate, they say that why is the National Biodiversity Authority imposing another tax? We pay tax for this thing, we pay tax for that thing, but we want to change the narrative. We want to convert this process into an incentivization process, that we comply with the ABS, but all those companies and corporates which are complying to ABS are then incentivized in some ways. I will show you in a while what mechanism we are trying to develop. The only other country which has done it, to my mind, is Colombia. And of course, capacity building will remain a very important issue for all times to come. So this is a very interesting graphic. This publication 2021, we are working with Price Waterhouse Company, and you can see in one single graphic all problems which relate to the access and benefit sharing, the application of Nagoya Protocol, have been summed up over here. Top of the line, number 1, as I said, is traceability. We need to know the end-to-end tracing of the product systems at its values over there. Where are the repositories? Do we have a digital maturity? See, while I am pushing for the digital India, as we call it, we need to develop further the digital maturity. We need to provide access to these resources, and we need to have a digital system of pick and mat. We are able to do a tracking, and of course, the big companies and corporates are also skeptical about data privacy and security. So these are the single graphic conveys a lot of meaning. It tells us that where we need to move forward and how we can combine our resources to ensure that the Nagoya Protocol and ABS process is very well defined. I did mention about the pilot blockchain technology. This technology, of course, is very intense, very IT requirement, but this is the way we need to go forward. And we are now working with, I'm pleased to say, we are working with the UNDP in developing a project. Recently, we had the phase 1 of the project, which ended in April 2021. But we now realize that we need to come together for pilot blockchain process in order to bring in a very strong technology for use of blockchain in the ABS process. I mentioned to you about ABS, incentivizing it. What you see in front of you is a logo. What we are trying to reach out to our corporates, that if you are compliant, if you have done all your monetary and non-monetary benefits, you have done this sharing of that, then you can be provided a logo, which you see is a depiction that ABS, as everybody understands, is a process of conservation of resource. So the central lotus plant is the plant resource, and the hands which are protecting it are ensuring that this particular resource needs to be protected. It cannot be overused, it cannot be misused, and we want to work out and give all the companies which are doing a lot for the access and benefit sharing process, we can incentivize them. We in India have a Quality Council of India, a body which provides this certification. We are working, we are, I must say, very early on, because there are not good or many examples, but excepting for Colombia and Costa Rica, which have made some beginning, we want to join hands with all our partners. And I take this opportunity to invite everybody, my colleagues in the CBD, that we need to push this forward purpose. I think that is what I wanted to say. I hope I have been within the time limits, but we would be very willing to answer if there are any queries or questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. And looking at the time, we've got 50 minutes still left, but let's pretend we're not seeing the time. May I ask to Mr. Guillaume, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning. Let me introduce myself. My name is Guillaume Faure. I'm Deputy Head of Supervisions of Impacts on Biodiversity Office in the Ministry for an Ecological Transition. I'm dealing with many subjects and legislations, among with the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. My presentation, can you see my presentation? I don't hear anybody.
Yes, we can see your presentation. Merci.
Okay, thank you. My presentation is divided into 3 parts. It's the sommaire. So let's start with the first one. The legal
Guillaume. Sorry,
Yes.
Guillaume. You could do on presentation mode, then we wouldn't see the whole slides on the side. Thank you.
Where is it?
The bottom right.
Bottom right.
Just to the left of the Zoom. At the bottom.
Go to the bottom. Still.
No.
It's like a glass down there.
I don't see it.
Yeah, you see there, Depositaire, Française, notes, commentaries.
Yes.
And then there's a still further, one more, that one.
Is it okay?
Press it again. Yep.
Guillaume, under sharing.
It doesn't change anything.
Yeah, under sharing.
Julie, can you instruct in French?
Under sharing, under the sharing tab, there's a show diagram with the play button. Under that, there's a tiny arrow, and you can select what you want to share. Otherwise, I can share it for you if you prefer.
Yes, please, because I'm trying to adjust, but
Alex, can you take over and share? Right, you can proceed. Who is sharing now?
Go ahead. I will share for you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
Just let me know when to change.
Okay. So my first important slide is on the legal framework for ABS implementation. We had an important law in 2016. By this law, firstly, France ratified the Nagoya Protocol, and then it implemented in France a regulation on access and benefit sharing. This law was completed by a decree in 2017, so our regulation entered into force in July 2017. Firstly, I wanted to say that the law precises certain genetic resources that are excluded from access measures, that are human genetic resources, genetic resources ruled by specific conventions, such as the International Treaty on the International Treaty on the Resources for Food and Agriculture, genetic resources that are not removed from the French territory, genetic resources issued from species used as models in laboratories, and genetic resources issued from activities dealing with the protection of defense and national security. The law makes a distinction between a general scheme and specific scheme. The general scheme is for wild genetic resources and traditional knowledge associated to genetic resources removed from the French territory and used for research and development activities. A model contract has been issued after that law. Next slide, please. The law provides specific schemes for genetic resources from pathogens collected by laboratories as part of prevention and risk control for human health. And the access to these genetic resources would be regulated by the Ministry of Health, and there is a text still in preparation, but it's quite a long time. The second specific scheme is for genetic resources from cultivated and wild relative plants and from domestic animals. But the Ministry for Food and Agriculture will decided not to regulate access to these genetic resources. The law provides specific measures for French overseas territories. For example, in French Polynesia and New Caledonia, those territories have a general competence on environmental affairs, and thus they have their own rules, their own ABS rules. French Guyana and Wallis and Futuna Islands, those two territories are designated as territories where local communities may own traditional knowledge. And for other French overseas departments, the Ministry for an Ecological Transition is the national competent authority for those territories. In a few words about the institutional framework for ABS implement, PIC should be granted by Ministry for Transition Ecology, and access to traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources in the two territories that I mentioned. For this access, a public entity representing the local community should grant it. As I already told you, the Minister for Ecological Transition is the national competent authority for the general ABS scheme. And it is also the CNA to receive a declaration for due diligence. And Ministry of Research is the national competent authority for declarations of research public fundings involving the use of genetic resources and traditional knowledge. And last, the focal point also is the Ministry for an Ecological Transition through the International and European Affairs Department. Now I should give you a few words about the steps to access genetic resources. The 2016 law makes a distinction between three procedures. A procedure of declaration in case of access to genetic resources without any commercial purpose. A procedure of authorization to access to genetic resources with a commercial purpose, and a procedure of authorization to access to genetic resources associated to traditional knowledge. So for each procedure, the user has to fill a form or to use an online procedure. Generally speaking, information required from the users are the name of the user, a description of the activities and the purpose of the activities, the taxa that will be utilized, the places where the samples will be collected, the technical means to access the genetic resources and the analysis that are intended. We ask for a provisional timetable for undertaking the activities, and of course the action that will take place regarding benefit sharing. I give you a few examples of benefit sharing being stated that there is no monetary benefit sharing in the first procedure, that is to say the declaration procedure. And but in case of access with a commercial purpose, there can be a monetary benefit sharing, but the law encourages no monetary benefit sharing. So you can see on the slides certain examples for actions directed toward the territory of origin of the genetic resource. For example, collaborations with local stakeholders, conservation activities for the species that are mentioned in the declaration. Another example is knowledge sharing and awareness raising measures. For example, scientific or large-scale conferences, scientific publications, cooperations with schools, exhibitions, etc. And another example of benefit sharing can be a transfer of skills and technologies. Rapidly, the declaration procedure is quite quick because 2 months are enough to instruct the declaration. So the user submit its declaration to the ministry. It's instructed, and then there is a notification of the acknowledgement of receipt. And after a certain amount of receipts, a summary of the declarations is published every 6 months in an official gazette of the ministry. For an authorization procedure, it's a little bit. It takes 4 months around. So the authorization procedure is for direct commercial purpose. The direct declaration form must be submitted to the ministry. It is instructed. There is a negotiation of the benefits sharing contract, and then the access is authorized by decision of the ministry for an ecological transition. All declaration, allotments of receipts and authorizations are registered by the ministry in the clearinghouse so that they can constitute IRCC. To this point, more than 500 vouchers have been delivered in order to access genetic resources for research and development without any commercial purposes. Only a few authorization requests have been submitted until now and are being inquired. We have 2 agreements that have been signed in 2021. And France has published to the ABS Clearinghouse a national report on the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. And maybe I did mention that almost 500 RRCC have been issued till now. So I try to be quick, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. May I ask all the panelists to switch on their cameras?
Does it work?
And with permission from the audience, I have asked the audience whether we can go beyond with a bit of minutes. I did not ask them how long, but I think by 1:15 or so we should be done. And I saw many heads nodding in agreement that we can do so. Thank you very much, dear audience, for agreeing with us that we can go beyond time. We know it's a very hectic time, but the topic is important. I'm going to approach the moderation session in this way. I'll have a first block of questions for Mr. Joseph Macinda, and then our colleague Yam, and then Esteban, and then follow up with the second block of questions. We've been collecting questions as we proceeded. And the first question to you, Mr. Joseph, is from your presentation, it became clear that information on monetary benefits is often very confidential, and this has been an issue all along. Can you think of any way this challenge could be overcome? Because in terms of reporting, it becomes quite an interesting one. And to Mr. Guillaume, from your presentation, it became clear that France is an interesting case for ABS implementation, in that France is both a provider and a user country, because you've got overseas territories. Now, does this pose a challenge with regard to collecting information and reporting data on ABS? For Mr. Esteban, we had quite a couple of questions. From your presentation, it became clear that non-monetary benefits can come in many forms, and this could be a challenge for reporting. What do you think can be done to capture this flow of benefits, at least in part? And also, you've indicated that there are royalties being received. Who receives these royalties? Is the government or the universities? And how does Colombia calculate the value of genetic resources to be accessed or shared? Let me give those 3 panelists to give their answers, and then I'll shoot with the next round of questions. I'll repeat, Mr. Joseph, you mentioned that information on monetary benefits is often confidential. What can we do to overcome this challenge? Over to you, sir. Mr. Joseph, you have the floor. Your microphone.
Okay.
We can't hear you.
Now. Of course, most of this information is confidential, and yet we have a law in place. And basically, this is because the law is not being followed. Like the case I pointed out is, we came later on to realize that they had not done any pick or mat, but they had accessed our genetic resources. And now it is commercially being used, and yet they didn't follow the law, the procedures, the country procedures of how to get the genetic resources. And that's why now the case went to court. And so there's need for awareness creation The enforcement of the laws, we normally, as a country, we come up with laws, but enforcement is a big challenge. So there's need for awareness and then enforcement, strict enforcement of the law. Like the regulations we have from 2006, they are very good regulations, but enforcement has been a problem. It is just in piecemeal. In cases where there is a controversial issue, that's when now the law comes in and people try to follow the law. But in any case, in many cases, the law is ignored. So enforcement is the major thing, capacity building and enforcement.
So in other words, you are saying that perhaps we can find a way of putting clauses in the laws to address that issue of confidentiality.
Yes, there is a way, because it's not supposed to be confidential to everyone. Maybe the authorities concerned are the ones who should have the information kept, but it is normally confidential to everyone. Even the relevant authorities cannot talk. Like NEMA, KWS has the information but is not ready to share with NEMA.
All right.
So that's the issue, and yet NEMA is the authority. Yes.
So then one can conclude from your answer that perhaps one way of looking at it is that at national legislation, one can look at it and then maybe find a way of enforcing that somehow this confidentiality could be overcome by a listed measure.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Faure, I may come back to Mr. Faure.
Yes.
I guess you got a question that France is an interesting case for ABS implementation because you are both a provider and a user. What challenges does that pose for you in terms of collecting information and reporting data on ABS?
What challenges from our point of view?
Yes. So you are both a provider and a user country in
Yes.
terms of genetic resources, and you have to report on that. So what challenges does that pose for you? Are there challenges?
Well, I think the challenge would be our capacity to control the effectiveness of the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, because well, our regulation is quite recent. It entered into force 4 years ago. And so till now, we concentrated on the implementation of our regulation, but we have not really begun to control the effectiveness of this regulation. And I think that will be the main challenge to assure that our regulation is efficient.
So what you are saying then is that perhaps indicators should focus on not only on implementation, but whether implementation has been effective.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Esteban, you said that non-monetary benefits can come in many forms, and this could be a challenge for reporting. One, what do you think can be done to capture this flow of benefits, at least in part? For example, could countries report on the number of agreements that have provided non-monetary benefits, or attempt to categorize the type of benefits received for reporting purposes? And then two, who receives the royalties? How does Colombia calculate the value of genetic resource to be accessed and shared? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Toko. In fact, non-monetary benefits are diverse, but we think that they could be categorized, for example, in categories like technical trainings or socialization of research results, that, as you can see, are the main categories of our non-monetary benefits. And in that regard, with that categorization, we can assess how many monetary, non-monetary benefits are agreed in those categories. For example, as you can see, in my presentation, I showed some example of the number. For example, the users agreed to carry out 5 technical trainings. So we have that information. We have the number of technical trainings that the user perform or carry out in the execution of its access contract. And this information is also available in the activity reports that the user must send during the execution of the contract. The user agree to present activity reports mainly in a periodicity of a year. Each year of the execution of the contract, the user sent to us an activity report with that evidence. If in this year the user carries out a technical training with the community that provides the biological resource, they send to us, for example, the evidence of that technical training, and this information is in the activity reports as well as in the follow-up reports that the ministry issues when we evaluate that information. And regarding the monetary benefits, they are calculating using different formulas depending on the kind of monetary benefits. For example, the initial payment is calculated basically depending on the number of samples that are to be accessed. And for example, the initial the payment associated with profits is calculated taking into account the criteria that I showed. For example, the productive sector, if the species is endemic or not, the threat level, and the type of applicant. In one of each, in each of these criteria, there is settled a value. For example, the pharmaceutical sector has a different value than the agricultural sector, and this value is settled in the formula and calculated. And in this way, the monetary benefit is calculated, replacing the values depending on the information of the access request in those formulas. And these royalties are perceived through the National Environmental Fund. Through this fund, they are collected, and then they are destined for projects for sustainable use of biodiversity and its conservation. And the ministry, as the competent national authority in ABS matters, has the autonomy to manage that money.
Thank you. I am now moving to the next block for Mr. Thomas from Germany. Some countries have suggested previously that publication and patent databases would be interesting places to look for data on ABS implementation and compliance. What role would you see the Secretariat play in collecting and analyzing information from these sources? And how could these results help monitor national and global implementation of ABS in the context of the post-2020 global powers framework? Is that question clear, more or less?
Not 100. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I heard you.
I'll go through it again.
So
there are yes, it's so. I'll break it down. Some countries have suggested previously that publications and patent databases will be interesting places to look for data on ABS implementation as well as compliance. Now, what role would you see the Secretariat play in collecting and analyzing information on ABS from these sources? And how could such information help monitor national and global implementation of ABS, especially in the context of the post-2020 global borders framework? And I think the same question also goes to India. And for India, I would also like to ask Mr. Vinod, what's the ratio of monetary versus non-monetary benefits for IRCs approved already? Do you have that? And then it was also for all of you, it would be good to reflect on, could an indicator be something like benefits that are not being shared? Could that be a good indicator? So over to you, Thomas, and over to you, Mr. Vinod, and then the other one, anyone can take it.
Okay, I give it a try. I assume secretariat means the CBD secretariat, I guess. That's,
yes.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, yes, publications and patent databases are, of course, sources of information that we need to use. I don't think we have that many sources of information to find relevant information, ABS relevant information. I mean, I would say, first of all, regarding patent databases, that refers more to commercial utilization. And yes, that might be relevant, but it's not the only source, because not all the sectors are patenting their innovations or products. So it is an important or interesting source of information, but I guess not the end of the discussion. Regarding publications, I think it gets even more difficult. We know that there are many publications out there related to biodiversity, to conservation, sustainable use issues. Some also, or many also, which are linked to research on genetic resources and their composition, genetic composition, etc. The difficulty in practice, I guess, will be to distinguish between what we understand as ABS relevant research, which would need to trigger or fall within the framework of ABS obligations, and the broader set of research that is including biodiversity, but not necessarily what we are after under the Nagoya Protocol, I guess. And as I try to highlight also in my presentation, we are trying to look into this issue because in the end, there's so much information out there. You have to find automated ways to collect and analyze the information. It cannot be done by CBD staff, SCBD staff, in a manual way. So that would be my answer on those questions, and maybe other colleagues.
So in short, there could be merits, but with some provisos. Mr. Vinod, from your presentation, quite a lot of experience, and what can you say about the ratio of monetary and non-monetary benefits for IRCs that have already been approved, roughly? Can't hear you.
Yeah. As I said, right now the focus has been on monetary resources, sharing of the monetary ones. But gradually we will move into the non-monetary ones as well. And I can't give you an offhand question, but definitely I will look at our database and look at the 70% odd IRCCs that we have filed, that what kind of proportion is there. And as I said, in monetary resource also we have a range. It could be as low as 0.1% of the turnover, and it could be as high as 5%. So certainly these figures can be worked out. But as I said, our effort now is to, while continuing with the monetary resources, we need to increase the proportion of non-monetary ones as well. And maybe in another 6 months to a year, we should be able to report that what is the proportion and has it changed or not. Thank you.
Thank you. The final question is to any one of you. In the GBF process, there have been calls to measure the share of benefits or amount or percentage contributing to conservation and sustainable use. From your perspective, is this practical? And how would you foresee reporting on this measure? Any of you can take it, Esteban?
Okay, thank you. For the Colombian perspective, it is feasible. It is a challenge, of course, because the information is not systematized. So, for example, in the Colombian case, even if the information is available on the activity reports. In case this indicator is developed, we need to come back to that information and assess the amount of monetary benefits that and non-monetary benefits that have been received, taking into account a period of time. But given that in our case the information is available and is on the activity reports, we can measure the increase of both non-monetary and monetary benefits in a period of time.
Thank you. Mr. Masinde? Is that practical, or how do you foresee reporting on this? Whether benefits can be
what I can say, what I can say on that is maybe the Secretariat to come up with some guidelines on how to measure and try to help countries to come up with concrete systems of how to measure the monetary benefits and how they can contribute to conservation. I think you need to come up with some guidelines on that.
Thank you. Mr. Matur?
As I said, in our law, the access and benefit sharing guidelines, the percentages of sharing are fixed. So the access and benefit sharing committee looks at the type of resource, the kind of resource, the quantum of resource, and then puts a value which can be 0.1% of the annual turnover of the company, and it could be as high as 5%. So certainly we do have figures but you raised a bigger question that whether corporates will be willing to share this or not. So that, of course, is a question which we need to answer and take up with the corporates. But I am very sure that if we are able to sell to the corporates that ABS is not just tax, it is also an incentive for them to do better and bigger business, they will be then coming up and saying that these are the non-monetary benefits we have offered to the local communities, and therefore they will have a much better reputational benefits in the market. So it is on these lines we are working. It's early on, but definitely we will come to some better leads as we go along. Thank you.
Mr. Foray?
Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, our law has decided to encourage no non-monetary benefit sharing, and so we are very open to any kind of benefit sharing, like I mentioned as examples. And well, as I mentioned too, our regulation is quite new, and one of our challenges is already to let the regulation be known by everybody, by every user, potential user, especially in France. So till now, our approach is very open to attract and to give a good image of this regulation.
Thank you. Thomas?
Thank you. I guess one of the features that would help us or provider countries in establishing that link between the benefit sharing and conservation sustainable use and the other GBF goals would be to set up a fund where the monetary benefits would flow in, and from there they could be distributed for relevant projects related to GBF goals or to conservation sustainable use in general. And regarding the non-monetary benefit sharing, I guess if it's ABS relevant, for example, research projects, training programs, capacity building activities, I think they will all directly or indirectly be relevant for the GBF achievement and for conservation sustainable use, because studies, creation of knowledge related to biodiversity is, I guess, the starting point for all other activities for the benefit of the first two objectives of the CBD. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to all the attendees. It has been quite a fruitful and interesting webinar. Many questions have come up, and I did ask a question that was not really answered, and that was whether there could be an indicator to measure how much benefits are not being shared, and thus identifying products based on biodiversity without any access agreement or avoiding local or international regulations. But that one can be food for thought as we conclude. And what has become clear is that capacity building remains an issue and important. Awareness creation remains an issue. And interestingly, also incentivizing ABS becomes an issue. The Indian experience shows that it's not only focusing on non-monetary or monetary, but there is now an impetus towards non-monetary benefits. And then finally, that from the France experience, that implementation is not everything. One has to ask, is such implementation effective? So the indicators need to look also at the effectiveness and efficiency of these of the measures that has been put in place. With that, may I then therefore, on behalf of the Secretariat and all those that have attended today and the speakers, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you all in Geneva when we continue the work on this very important turning point and crossroad for life on this planet. Thank you so much to you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and have a good day.
I apologize on the behalf of my focal point. He was not able to join at the last moment, but conveys his best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's noted.